Hi guys, I'm Chelsea and welcome back to my channel. So today we're going back into more of the brain, biology, and kind of anatomy. So we're going to be talking about action potentials today. So a lot of us already know about this, but I'm just creating this video for a lot of newbies who just started learning about this topic. So we will explain a graph, although it might be boring for some of us because a lot of us already learned about these action potential graph. So how is it triggered, first of all? Well, it sometimes comes down to the channels that allow the potassium and sodium to leak through. For example, these leakage channels and the sodium, it can just leak through and leak out, right? But some of the gated channels, now, if you're going to scold me, right before you scold me in the comments section, please don't scold me for this because I am doing this on Google Slides and they do not allow me to basically do a lot of detailed pictures and everything, so don't blame me, okay? So gated ion channels. These are the gated ones, and when they open, a lot of ions love to rush through. Unlike the leakage ones, they are always leaky, and they don't have any gates or kind of like prevention from keeping one out or one in. And then there is obviously the sodium-potassium pump. Some of us know it, some of us don't, but it is pretty crucial in order to understand the actual physics behind action potential. So I recommend you learning about the sodium-potassium pump before going back to this video. I will still be here and I will still exist, so don't worry about that. So what happens during action potential? The graph. You can skip to the next part if you don't want to see this graph part because you already saw it. That's fine, but I will explain it for all those who are new anyway. So the neuron starts at a resting membrane potential, which is the normal potential for a regular cell. It's normally negative, especially for neurons. They start around negative 75. Now, it isn't always negative 75. It could be something else, but it is generally considered to be negative 75, so we're going to stick with that. So eventually it will receive a stimulus, aka a neurotransmitter, when it binds to the receptors and it gets a stimulus, and it starts rising up as the voltage increases. Once it hits some kind of threshold, like let's say negative 55 again, not apply for every neuron in the world, but it does apply to a lot of the neurons and is good for demonstration, so we're going to stick with that. So if it does reach to this threshold, the voltage-gated ion channels will open and a lot of the other gated channels will also open, and you will trigger a big spike in the mountain and you will go down eventually, but we're getting a bit ahead of ourselves. One point to note that if you don't reach this, let's just say expectation for an action potential, you don't trigger one. You only need to get this specific point and you trigger it. If you get a small one, you don't do anything. If you get the exact threshold, you do it. So it's an all or nothing. If you half turn on the switch, it doesn't do anything. You gotta turn it on fully, and then it starts off. Okay, there's no little action potential or no big action potential. Every time the action potential that comes out, the original signal is always the same. It's just that the outcome is very different. It ranges from things very easy, like picking up a cup, easy for you, not easy for the body, to things as complex as, let's say, coordinating your fingers together, okay? So once you start triggered, and once it is triggered, you go up, 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 and it reaches the spike for a split half a second, and it goes around to positive 30 to positive 40 millivolts because the unit is often millivolts. And remember, it doesn't linger here forever and ever. Okay, it will eventually go down. And when it does go down due to the sodium-potassium pump's cleanup job, it will go down below your normal resting membrane potential, and that is totally normal. But it will take a bit of time to go back up progressively and get back to your regular potential. And it is kind of hard to stimulate yourself while you're in this hyperpolarization state because you're lower than the regular one. So the regular one goes up, you've got to take more energy to get to even the regular height rather than just the action potential itself. This is called the refractory period. This period is when you can't trigger any action potential because you're too low off in the diagram. So same thing, except when you're looking at a neuron, one segment of this thing triggers, right? All the voltage-gated ion channels open, the ions rush in, K, which is just potassium, rushes out, and here we go, over here. So once it goes over here, the voltage-gated ion channels on the next segment of the neuron get just stimulated because this voltage over here is obviously changed, and these ones get stimulated, so these ones open up, and this one then just kind of jumps around to the next neuron. So this one stimulates, and then this one stimulates, refractory, refractory, refractory. And then once the refractory period is dead after about 2 milliseconds or so, you can trigger another action potential. And remember, no backflow is allowed. If the neuron goes this way, it will always stay this way. It will never go in the other way unless you somehow magically turn it around. Nobody can do that yet. So this is basically how an action potential happens in a neuron. Oh yeah, and remember, I know I already said this in my other videos, but in case you didn't hear, some neurons have myelin sheaths surrounded by it. That means the signal can jump from one open point over the myelin sheath to the next open point and over. So instead of going do, it goes big jumps, big jumps, big jumps. Okay? So this is basically how a neuron goes when it is viewed with an action potential. So let's do a quick review because the action potential physics are a bit confusing at first. And so basically, yes, we're going to review over everything we've learned so far, and this will be the end of the video after. So remember, it starts at resting membrane potential, and then it will raise up after some stimulus of any sort. And when it does hit this threshold, it hits it and it goes up. Once it touches the peak, it stays there for a split half a second at around positive 30 to positive 40 millivolts, and it goes back down to hyperpolarization because it goes under the regular thresholds, and you can't trigger the action potential in this state, so you gotta go back up. This is called the refractory period. This period is the only period when you can't trigger an action potential in normal circumstances. Now, this one is when the action potential starts here, because there's only one segment of the neuron that lights up at first. But then the voltages, gated ion channels, respond to this kind of voltage change in the neighbor. And this one enters refractory, and this one gets triggered, and then the neighboring one gets triggered, kind of like dominoes. If you set up dominoes across the whole table, and you knock the first one down, and you're wondering why the last one has been knocked off the table, this is exactly what is happening with the neuron. Because the neuron is just transferring the action potential, jumping the signal around from area to area and so on, and eventually it will reach the end of the neuron. It doesn't matter how long it is, it will eventually reach the end, and sometimes it will pass on because the action potential will get converted into chemicals such as neurotransmitters, and it will get passed on to the next neuron to repeat the cycle all over again. So this is basically it for that part. So just to be noting that the action potential is responsible for every movement you make and a lot of the things you think, basically, because neurons send a signal in this exact format, and it is pretty important. If you have a good reaction time or anything that is related to your movements, like if you play any soccer, you need to kick the ball exactly when you need to. If you play badminton, you gotta hit the birdie at the right time, etc., etc. So there are a lot of uses for action potential because every movement, every thought, everything that involves you using any of your neurons basically involves your action potential. This is why it's pretty important. So that's all for today. I hope you enjoy your experience here, and I hope you learned something new. Thank you. Bye.